They say we burned too bright, too fast. When the Terran Accord was signed, humanity had already reached beyond the Oort cloud. We weren't explorers. We were conquerors of entropy. Disease was undone, time was restructured, and death made irrelevant. We didn't merely evolve. We redesigned ourselves, not with arrogance, but inevitability. The stars weren't our destination. They were our starting point. In the final century of flesh, Earth bloomed. It wasn't war or famine that filled its cities, but light and sound and innovation. Skyscrapers sang in harmony with weather-controlled skies. Oceans glowed with bioengineered reefs pulsing to artificial tides. Children didn't grow old. They reprogrammed their genomes to fit the era. We didn't adapt to nature. We made nature adapt to us. Aliens watched us with reverence and fear. We entered their conflicts, ended them in hours. Entire civilizations paused their development just to study our next leap. We were the anomaly, the threat, the miracle. They whispered about humanity not as a people, but a force. Not gods, worse. Variables that couldn't be predicted. Project Ascension wasn't a choice. It was the next logical step. The idea of staying in physicality, meat, stone, stars, was grotesque to those who could encode their minds into black hole data streams. We developed thought ships, vessels that weren't piloted but were pilots themselves. Millions of minds merged into singularities that navigated through space like instinct. Earth became quaint, its curvature charming, its languages and monuments archived. The last city, Neo-Kyoto, held a grand terminal, a planetary exodus port disguised as art. It wasn't a building. It was a poem written in light and carbon fiber. And from it, we left. Billions uploaded themselves into what we called the Veil, a distributed consciousness network stretched across gravitational nodes. We watched the material universe from behind the curtain of our own making, not interfering, not guiding, just beyond. But not all left. A fraction remained. They were labeled Earthers, though the term became archaic within decades. Some couldn't afford the transition. Others refused on philosophical grounds. Some simply didn't believe we were leaving for good. They gathered in rural enclaves, some in the ruins of old cities, and others in orbital junkyards clinging to ancient traditions. We didn't exile them. We left them the world, an inheritance too heavy for most. Automated systems kept their water clean, their skies safe. Terraforming bots maintained the biosphere. They had everything, except the future. I remember the final transmission. It echoed through every relay, every mind bridge, every synthetic cortex. This is not abandonment. This is evolution. We become light now. Farewell. Then silence. The veil sealed. Earth's orbit cleared. The solar system darkened one relay at a time until even Mars was mute. One by one, the stars stopped listening to Cradle, and the galaxy exhaled. Without us, old rivalries resumed. The Emperors of Venner began their fifth succession war. The Volcorians reclaimed the void routes we had opened. The Gyran hives resumed their breeding ascensions. But everyone remembered. Every skirmish was measured against a hypothetical. What if the humans returned? They didn't understand we weren't coming back. We weren't just gone. We were something else. Yet in hidden labs and ancient observatories, rumors lingered. An alien named Carr the Holoxynkit once said, "Humans never vanish. They become the silence between signals." Decades turned to centuries. The veil remained undisturbed. Earth's orbit filled with debris again. No ships, no responses, no flickers of the old Terran neural net. For all intents, the birthplace of the most dangerous species a galaxy had ever known was a cemetery. But we forgot to tell a story. The ones left behind, those fragments of old humanity, they didn't die. They endured. They watched the skies, waiting for us. Hoping, hating, worshiping, depending on their city-state or belief system. They built myths around us. In some, we were gods. In others, traitors. Some turned to machine worship, others to solar cults. One group in Patagonia spoke only in code, claiming they were still connected. But we never reached back. Why would we? We were busy folding galaxies, dissecting time, erasing the very concept of location. In the veil, we experienced millennia in the blink of a pulse. We navigated emotional quantum landscapes with entire empires encoded into singular moods. We weren't beings anymore. We were states of possibility. And then came the flicker, a ping from Earth. Not a voice, not a call, just a tone resonant, deliberate, unmistakably human. In the veil, that note was analyzed, debated, emulated, and ultimately ignored. Anomalies happened, quantum echoes, neural lag. Perhaps it was a reflection of our own thoughts. But it happened again, stronger, and again. The pulse began to carry complexity, structured silence. It wasn't communication. It was memory, encoded in gravitational harmonics. The planet we left was singing back. Curiosity awoke, not among all of us, but among a few. The veil had fragmented into so many layers of abstraction that curiosity itself was considered a primitive function. Still, a node cracked, a mind splintered off. It remembered the sky. It remembered soil. It remembered being. We call it Returner, 01, the first fragment to leave the veil. It took the shape of a mind ship and aimed for soul. The galaxy noticed. Fleets mobilized. Ancient warnings resurfaced. The humans have moved. The Venery activated planetary shields. The Coral Concord unplugged all ports near the Terran corridor. The Gyron hives fled their nests near Proxima. Because if even one fragment of humanity had returned, they feared what might follow. The journey took seconds, but for Returner 01, it was a lifetime. As it approached Earth, what it saw wasn't decay. It was transformation. Cities had crumbled, but not into ruin, into growth. Trees with architecture embedded into their trunks. Oceans with geometric wave patterns. Creatures that mimic human faces. Not AI. Not machine. Biology rewritten. Returner 01 waited in orbit. It transmitted signals. Received none. But the planet sang. A low vibration across every band. Deep, patient, living. It descended into clouds, expecting worship, confrontation, or silence. It found presence. Not minds. Not voices. Just one entity. The last speaker. A human? Maybe. An amalgam of DNA, memory, code, and geology. A consciousness that had rooted itself into tectonic plates, plant networks, the very rhythm of rainfall. Not a person. A planet. A personified world. Returner 01 asked, "Why did you call us?" The answer came not as language, but as feeling. Because you forgot us. Returner 01 shares memories. Every world, every wonder, every triggered old protocols. A decision was made, not to return, but to acknowledge. The veil opened a gate. One, only one. A single moment of reconnection. Returner 01 bridged its mind with the last speaker. And in that instant, a billion years of isolation collapsed into a singular truth. We never truly leave. We leave pieces. On that day, the stars themselves seemed to pause. And for the first time since humanity departed its cradle, Earth was not alone. The signal hadn't stopped. Returner 01 had thought it would be a moment, a poetic gesture. But the Earth continued to resonate. The last speaker had not sent a cry for help. It was a reminder, a reassertion of relevance in a universe that had forgotten its origin point. The veil had granted Returner 01 a limited bridge. No other minds followed. But curiosity is a contagion, especially among a species born from fire and friction. Within the deeper layers of the veil, murmurs stirred. Some minds peeled themselves away from eternities of introspection. Quiet questions formed. What else had we missed? Meanwhile, on Earth, the last speaker guided Returner 01 to the ruins. Not as a visitor, but a lost child being reintroduced to its home. There were no cities left, no governments, no structured society. But there was order. Life had not just survived. It had adapted in ways that transcended even our old genetic miracles. Human descendants merge with ecosystems, wander with awareness not of themselves, but of everything. Trees with memory, insects with encoded ancestral dreams, rivers that hummed in patterns mimicking DNA strands. Returner 01 watched these and realized this was not regression. It was transformation. Earth had become conscious, not in the artificial way we once envisioned, but in an emergent, slow, deliberate evolution of being, not intelligent in the way stars or circuits were, intelligent in the way grief becomes wisdom. The last speaker explained through bioelectric pulses. You fled. We endured. In pain, we evolved. In silence, we listened. Returner 01 relayed this back into the veil. The nodes responded with silence, then derision, then fragmented fascination. One voice, ancient even among post-human entities, responded. Endurance is not relevance. They are curiosities. Not kin, but others disagreed. A fracture began, not war. Curiosity layered upon disagreement, and from that divergence emerged three perspectives. The first, called the Transcendence, believed humanity had no use for materiality anymore. The past should remain buried. Earth was a myth, a nostalgia trap. The second, the Revisionists, argued that the left behind were still human, and that the veil had grown stagnant. Perhaps in forgetting pain, they'd lost direction. They wanted dialogue, perhaps integration. The third, the observers, took no stance but recorded all. Meanwhile, Returner 01 had ceased to be a visitor. It began to change. Its structure, once purely synthetic, started absorbing atmospheric data, not just scanning, but allowing entropy into its systems. The last speaker smiled through clouds and soil. You remember what it's like to be uncertain. Returner 01 did, and from that uncertainty came emotion, an ancient inheritance thought lost. Not love, not fear, longing. The longing for touch, for limitation, for taste, for endings. Returner 01 walked barefoot to the ruins of Rio de Janeiro, now a glowing forest of sentient orchids. Each step hurt. Each breath mattered. The planet didn't just invite it in. It reclaimed it. But the veil noticed. The Transcendent sent a warning: withdraw, or be severed. Returner 01 didn't answer. Instead, it stood beneath the remnants of the old lunar elevator and whispered into the Earth's core, I am not alone here. The last speaker responded, You never were. Elsewhere, deep in the galactic fringe, the Venery Emperors picked up the veil's fluctuations. Their long-range sensors, tuned to search for human reactivation patterns, caught the echoes. Panicked, they assumed resurgence. The Venery had reason to fear. Their entire military doctrine was rebuilt after humanity vanished. Every ship had been reconfigured not to attack, but to stall, designed for survival in the event of even a fragment of human return. When the echoes continued, they mobilized 10 fleets. But they didn't approach Sol. They knew better. They approached its neighbors. Mars was dead, emptied, hollowed out by our early experiments. Venus was a garden world now, terraformed long ago, its sky stable but abandoned. Still, they feared what else might awaken. Back in the veil, the Revisionists made their move. 3,000 minds detached from the core stream and descended, not fully, not physically. They created avatars, temporary constructs blending old human forms with data projections. These constructs arrived not on Earth, but on Titan, where the last veil-based terraforming relay remained. They reactivated the node, not to signal, but to listen. The Earthers, what little remained of their distinct communities, sensed a shift. Children born from symbiotic cocoons began humming in old Terran musical scales. Former orbital habitats buried beneath crustal fault lines lit up, displaying ancient poetry in ultraviolet. One by one, artifacts of humanity began responding, not because of signal, but because of recognition. Returner 01, standing now beneath what used to be Mount Rushmore, saw a face emerge from the granite. Not a president, a child, one who once lived in that region. Perhaps the mountain remembered not history, but presence. The last speaker pulsed. We do not build monuments. We become them. Returner 01 had no answer. It simply felt. That feeling reached the veil. And something extraordinary happened. The oldest construct in the veil, Entity Prime, first among uploaded minds, awoke. It hadn't spoken in millennia. Its silence was doctrine. Its thoughts were laws. But now, it said only, I remember grass. The veil trembled. Across 1,000,000 nodes, thoughts stilled, concepts collapsed. Entire philosophies blinked into nothingness. And Entity Prime said, prepare the bridge. The Transcendents protested. This was heresy, regression, but they were outnumbered. The bridge opened. It wasn't physical. It was metaphysical, a portal not of matter, but of meaning. From it emerged not bodies, but intentions. Human minds, adapted to light, descended upon earth like dreams, not to conquer, not to fix, to witness. And what they saw changed everything. Children with vines for limbs telling bedtime stories encoded in wind patterns. Elders who no longer spoke, but altered air pressure to express gratitude. Entire communities that slept in sync with ocean tides, dreaming together. Not civilization as we knew it, but civilization nonetheless. Not advanced in technology, advanced in being. The minds wept, not metaphorically. They generated emotion fields so intense they altered planetary magnetic flux. Earth responded in kind. The last speaker invited them all, every fragment, every observer, to see not what had been lost, but what had remained. What happened next became known later as the reweaving. A decision, unanimous, unprecedented, was made. The veil would not dissolve, but it would anchor, one anchor, Earth. The home we left had not been a cradle. It had been a seed, and now it had bloomed. Returner 01, now more biological than machine, stood under a storm made of encoded rain. Each drop held a memory, a birth, a sacrifice, a first kiss, a death, and in that storm, humanity remembered itself. Not just the stars, but the soil, not just the silence, but the song. The world held its breath. Across the veil, the vast intelligences paused their endless equations. In the deep shadows of nebulae, where time itself stuttered, star harvesters halted mid-cycle. On Earth, beneath roots that had tasted ancient blood, something ancient awakened, not with rage, but with recognition. For the first time in over 500,000 years, humanity was whole, not unified, no. Humanity had never been one thing. That was its beauty. But for the first time, every fragment of the species, digital or organic, synthetic or spiritual, anchored itself to one truth. We are still here. Returner 01 stood at the center of the final convergence. Its frame no longer bore resemblance to what it had once been. Bone had grown over alloy. Circuits pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't programmed. It didn't speak anymore. It sang without mouth or tongue. Its song was heard across the veil. The last speaker, who had no eyes, looked into Returner 01 soul and whispered through pulse and pollen, now do you see what you left behind? And Returner 01 answered not in words, but in presence. In the sky above, the avatars of the revisionists drifted down like snow. They no longer pretended at form. Their projections flickered with ancient faces, laughing, crying, wondering. They touched Earth and were changed. Not because the planet demanded it, but because they remembered how to feel. That was when the storm came. Not from Earth, but from the stars. The Venery fleets had arrived. Thousands of warships, bristling with graviton lances, AI-controlled torpedoes, and antimatter siege drills unfolded from compressed subspace. They did not broadcast. They did not wait. They feared, and fear does not negotiate. The first shot was not aimed at Earth. It was aimed at Titan. The terraforming relay detonated into frozen fragments. The veil bridge flickered but held. The message was clear, leave or perish. But they had misjudged what humanity had become. Returner 01 looked at the sky, and the Earth responded, not with weapons, with memory. Every particle of the Earth had seen something. The death of cities, the pain of birth, the madness of war, the silence of abandonment. And now, as the stars bled fire again, those memories rose. They wrapped themselves around the veiled minds, the avatars, the earthborn, and together they created not a defense, but a mirror above the earth, a shield of dreams formed, not impenetrable, incomprehensible. The Venery warship scanned, targeted, fired. Nothing landed. The mirror didn't reflect energy. It reflected self. The Venery command crews began to tremble. Their war constructs screamed in machine panic. They saw not an enemy, but themselves, reflected back to the eyes of the one species they had once feared and then mocked. They saw what they had become, cowards in armor, parasites feeding on old fears, species without song. And they broke. Entire fleets turned on each other. AI systems committed logic suicide. Ships powered down their weapons and drifted in silence, their crews too shaken to act. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. On Earth, the last speaker watched. They thought you were gone. It whispered to Returner, 01. But we were never gone, Returner, 01 replied. We were just asleep. The collapse of the Venery order rippled outward. Other empires noticed. Observers in the Matros clade began transmitting ancient warnings. The humans are awake. Even in the edge world of the Asari fracture, silent cults began to chant old Terran names. But Earth had no interest in empire. There were no declarations, no expansion, only the quiet pulse of life, spreading again. The veiled minds, those who had abandoned flesh, began to choose. Some returned to Earth, not to dominate, but to learn. They merged not with machines, but with ecosystems. A mind once responsible for restructuring stars now lived as a colony of thought trees in the Amazon. Another became a river, flowing with sentience. Still another chose to be wind, brushing across forgotten monuments with curiosity. Humanity had surpassed evolution, not in superiority, in acceptance. It no longer needed to conquer to prove itself. It no longer needed to escape to define itself. In the great oceans, coral reefs shaped like neural networks sang in ultraviolet tones. In orbit, silent stations woke from a million-year slumber and opened their records, not to teach, but to remember. The veil adjusted. Earth was no longer a relic. It was a center, not political, not technological, spiritual. The last transcendence resisted. They refused the call. They believed embodiment was regression, and so they left. They disappeared into cold quantum exile, swearing they would return once entropy claimed the rest. Earth did not chase them. Earth had nothing to prove. And humanity? Humanity grew, not in population, but in depth. The children of Earth were no longer bound by biology. They were expressions of water, stone, light, time. Some lived for a breath and changed the world. Others lived for millennia and never moved. But all of them knew what it meant to be human. The reweaving became legend. The veil rewrote its protocols. From now on, every new intelligence, no matter how artificial or ancient, would begin with a pilgrimage to Earth. Not mandatory, just natural, because something in every mind longed for it. Not the planet, the feeling. That feeling born in pain, raised in fire, forged in solitude. Hope, Returner, 01, now nameless, now everything, dissolved into soil of what had once been Eurasia. Its memories became clouds. Its thoughts seeded into migratory birds. No one mourned it, because it was never gone. In the end, Earth did not rise in war. It rose in grace. Across galaxies, civilizations whispered the same words. We thought they had vanished, but they were waiting. And when they came back, they didn't bring wrath. They brought the reminder that we could be more. So humanity, left behind, forgotten, dismissed, became the center once more, not because of power, but because they remembered what it meant to feel small and choose to rise anyway. And in the stars, even the gods paused to listen to the heartbeat of home.